morning. Well, I want to thank you, Jamal, for bringing all these great Dems together. Thank you for bringing your wife, Baina. I really appreciate you guys. I'd love to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington and then maybe answer questions that are of interest to you. And we'll talk about what we're going to do on the campaign trail as well. So it's been productive, interestingly, despite not having the House. Last Congress, we got a bunch of bipartisan things done. The big bipartisan infrastructure bill to build all the roads, the bridges, the sewers, rail, rural broadband. We passed the big CHIPS bill, the semiconductor manufacturing bill. That's going to create a lot of advanced manufacturing jobs across New York. We're going to have at least 3 major facilities being invested in New York. And then we passed the bipartisan gun trafficking bill to make it a federal crime and paired it with a lot of money for mental health, violence disruption money. So we can fund after school programming, summer school programming, anything that keeps kids safe, keeps kids out of gangs, keeps kids from going down rabbit holes on the internet, becoming shooters themselves, anything to help substance use disorder prevention, anything to help suicide prevention, something that really is about violence disruption. And then we did one Dem-only bill, which was all the money we got for lowering prescription drug prices, cap on insulin at $35 a month, cap on seniors' medicines at $2,000 a year, and a lot of money for green energy, a lot of money for things like wind and solar and geothermal and energy efficiency, so things that can help us build greenhouses and lower cost heating, lower cost refrigeration, anything that costs energy is in that bill. So that was all the efforts last year, and so a lot of the Republican members, in the Senate at least, are on a roll. They want to keep working on a bipartisan basis. So we just finished the defense bill in the Senate. A lot of good stuff in that bill. I got provisions for the first ever cyber academy, which is free college for kids that will do cyber. It's an augmentation of the GI Bill. I think it'll be a way to get more kids interested in tech and STEM earlier on, more diversity, more women, more foreign language speakers. It'll help our national security. We also got provisions in to track and trace all those aliens, which is kind of funny. So the spy balloon, we knew about the spy balloon because 3 years ago I created an office to track all of the unidentified aerial phenomenon, because pilots kept running into things like drones and other aircraft that they couldn't identify. They didn't know if it was Chinese or Russian or something else, but they couldn't identify it, and it became a safety issue. It became a flight safety issue. We need to have domain awareness, and we need to have air superiority, and we don't have it if we're not looking in these places. So that's how we caught the spy balloon, because we started directing our radars to look at all the area between commercial airspace and space. It's a huge area. We weren't looking at all. And so they're now required to report what they see, and they can't be retaliated against, because a lot of these pilots that did come forward were being retaliated against, and it ruined their careers. So people stopped reporting. And so now they have to report, and we have a scientist, Dr. Kirkpatrick, who reviews every single UAP that's reported in the military. We've had about 600 reports. He's reviewed about half of them. And a bunch are drone-like objects, a bunch are orb-like or spy balloon-like objects, and then a bunch he still doesn't know. So he's going to build more sensors, and he's going to figure it out, which is great. I do not know anything about any secret programs and any downed alien ships. I've not been told a thing, and the DoD will tell you it doesn't exist. But, again, we know they aren't always straight with you, so I'm pushing, and if nothing else, we'll at least know what our adversaries are doing. And if they are spying on our bases and spying on our nuclear sites and doing lots of spy balloons, we'll know it. So worked on that, and that got in the defense bill. And so now we're pivoting towards the farm bill, which is the next big bipartisan bill that we're working on. And it's a great place to get things like money for food security, for food banks, for kids, especially kids in college, sometimes don't have enough money for food. Kids in foster care, once they're 18, they definitely don't have enough money for food. They have no parents looking after them when they're in school. So lots of food security money, lots of money for our fruits and vegetables farmers, for our dairy farmers, help rural development, rural broadband, business development for rural small businesses. I'm doing a big bipartisan fund for rural development, and so I'm optimistic that we can get a lot of good stuff done this year as well. I'm also working with all sorts of Republicans on all sorts of things. So I'll give you some examples. Josh Hawley and I are working very hard on a bill to ban stock trading by members of Congress, because I put in the law 10 years ago that made them disclose all their stock trades so that the DOJ could investigate people who are doing insider trading. Well, they haven't been investigating, and people are insider trading. And we know this because 1 in 7 members of Congress haven't disclosed their trades, and members of Congress have an 18% higher return rate than the S&P 500. Do you think they're just smarter? Absolutely not. So we're going to ban it because they're not doing it right. And so I'm working with Lindsey Graham on a bill to end age discrimination. Last Congress, we fixed the law that if you're sexually harassed or assaulted at the workplace, you can sue in a court of law, and you can not have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We want to apply that for age discrimination too. So we're working on that. I'm working on a public safety bill with Ted Cruz. I'm working on a paid leave bill with Bill Cassidy. So all these very conservative Republicans, there are 1 or 2 things they're willing to do. And so I'm finding, what is that thing? How do we build the bill? How do we write the law? And we're making progress. So even though we don't have the House of Representatives, there are meaningful things we can do together, and that's part of my job of getting things done. But I think we get much more done if we had the House of Representatives. So I'm working on flipping the House, and that's where politics comes in. So I'm working on the first ever coordinated campaign for New York. We've never had this ever. And what it looks like is the House candidates and the Senate candidates and the local state Senate and state assembly can work together, raise money into a coordinated campaign fund within the state party that will focus on these battleground districts. There are 14. It means Biden won it by 14 points. So these are districts we can win back. 3 are in the Hudson Valley, 3 are in Long Island. And so these are campaigns that we're going to get our best candidates. We're going to help them with message discipline. We're going to help them save money, because if instead of getting 4 mailers from 4 different candidates, you'll get 1 mailer with the same message with 4 pictures of candidates on it. Right. That will be, it'll be cost efficient, saves you money, message discipline. We're also going to make sure we have money for lawn signs and grassroots advocating. We want to have door-to-door canvassing. We want to have rallies. And so these are all things we can do for Democrats up and down the ticket throughout the state. And so I'm going to work on that. The governor's all bought in. Hakeem Jeffries is all bought in. If Hakeem flips the House, he's the next speaker. So that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're working on. It's all exciting. I'm very motivated, and I'm optimistic that we can pass some more good laws, and I'm optimistic that we can flip the House next cycle right in New York State. So thank you for coming out, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
You've got a second mic.
They got a mic.
Okay.
Are Congressman Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene part of your alien studies?
So thoughtful. What a good question. We just don't know. We just don't know. Go ahead.
Junk bond or junk fees. I was just reading that Bidenomics and yourself and our great Democrats in Congress are trying to do something to help the middle class with junk fees charged by all kinds of corporates, including airlines, credit cards. Can you tell us the status of that and where we're going with that?
Yeah, so this is one of the big priorities of the administration and the Senate. We have a good bill to ban junk fees, and everybody knows, you see them especially when you buy an airline ticket. Yeah. You're so surprised. The ticket they say is $300, but then when you pay for it, it's $500. It doesn't make sense. It's these constant fees, and you see them on everything. Anything you buy, you're going to have a fee. We know them in our cell phone bills. We're used to those cell phone fees all the time, but they're in everything. So we're working on it. I don't know if it's bipartisan yet, so it may be just something that the White House wants to talk about. But some of the industries, I think he can say you can't have a fee. So I think they're trying to do a few things by executive order. So I'll let you know. I'll find out exactly what the likelihood of changing the law is. But I think they're trying to do a few things on their own, which is why they're talking about it, even though it's not bipartisan.
It's a good talking point.
I think so too, because first of all, we have inflation. So a lot of things are more expensive post-COVID because supply chain issues. So food's more expensive. A lot of our supply chains didn't work well during COVID. And Saudi Arabia keeps messing around with the price of oil just to, be difficult. And there's been a lot of changes, and those are hard, and that's why people don't have as much money as they had before. So we want to make sure we get costs down. That's why our priority was getting the prescription drug costs down. We did the 5 most often used drugs by seniors, and we're going to try to expand that to all drugs, making sure we can buy in bulk at the lowest price, just like the VA does, just like Canada does. Those are ways we can get costs down. And the energy bill is long-term going to get our energy costs down. So, go ahead. You need mine.
I'll take the.
Okay.
I'll take the. My question is centered around immigration. It's a very problematic issue for me to see people being bussed all across the country like human cargo.
Yeah.
And I know we are a better country than this, and I believe we can do better than this. So what would your suggestion be as to alleviate this problem in terms of getting both parties to the table? Because I believe if we come to the table and discuss it, we can find some better solutions than shipping people anywhere on buses anytime. And we're talking about human beings, and it shouldn't be this way. Immigrants have been a very major part of our country in terms of helping us on the farms and putting food in the stores, on the tables and all, and now we're treating them almost like cargo. Now, I know this country cannot support everybody who wants to be here, but we can come up with a better plan than we have. So what would your suggestions be in terms of addressing this issue?
Thank you. I agree. We are a very wealthy country. We are a very wealthy state. We are very generous people in New York. We have taken migrants and refugees and asylum seekers from all over the globe before, and it's helped lots of cities across New York State grow and help fill jobs that have been unfilled, whether it's our jobs in our restaurants or in our hotels or in our hospitals or in our farms. These are jobs that we aren't filling right now. We have 200,000 open jobs in New York State right now. And we need people to work. So one of the solutions is we should right-size immigration. We've not done this. Trump cut all the illegal immigration in half. And it's not really been increased. So I'm working with one Republican, Bill Cassidy, on one idea he has is to increase visas to 1 million visas for just healthcare workers, because we're so strapped for nurses and healthcare workers throughout the healthcare system, home health aides, the whole gamut. And I said to him, I would love to do that bill. Let's start writing that bill. So maybe one of the bipartisan things we could do with Republicans is right-sizing immigration, getting the right number of visas for each industry. Imagine if we could have another 500,000, let's say 500,000 ag visas. Imagine if we could have another 250,000 tech visas. Like whatever the industries that are desperate for workers, we should be able to have a path for legal immigration to do that, so people aren't so forced into these illegal routes. We also want to stimulate applications from countries of origin, because when you take that journey through many countries, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous for children, it's very dangerous for older people, and people are dying as they're coming into this country. Even in the North Country, we had a family try to cross from Canada in a boat. I think it was across, I think it was a river, but maybe it was a lake. They capsized and died, and it was like 4 children and 4 grandparents and 2 able-bodied adults. Like, it was just such a tragedy. It was clearly a family group that was desperate in the winter, and they died. So I agree. We should figure out how to do this well and solve the problem. The other thing we need is these asylum seekers. The law states that if you're applying for asylum, you have to apply and then wait 180 days before you can get your work visa. Well, that's 6 months, and people don't usually apply in the first day. So it could be 8 months before they can even legally work. It would be much better to expedite that time frame, let them start working within 30 days once they arrive and file for asylum. We also don't have enough lawyers to take their cases. We don't have asylum courts, enough courts to hear their cases. And so these asylum claims sometimes take 2 or 3 years just to hear. And to be in limbo that long, it's not a good system. So I agree, we need to fix the system. There are some bipartisan ideas about how to do it. We need comprehensive immigration reform. And in the meantime, I'm asking the White House to shorten the amount of time before they can work. Because if these folks could start working right away and fill all these open jobs, they wouldn't need to stay in shelters. They'd be able to afford rent, they'd be able to afford their own food. So the cost to New York would decrease extremely. So those are just a couple solutions I've offered to the president, to the governor, and to the mayor that we should work on together.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you for, again, being here. Right off the tip of your tongue on housing, I'm not sure how they could afford housing in New York State. So my question, just in little old Elmira, Chemung County, the cost of housing here is astronomical, and we don't have the jobs to be able for more than half of the people to even afford it. So a lot of them are getting TANF funds, a lot of them are getting extra support. Everybody's doing as much as they can. Yeah. The other day, I was riding down the street, it was Saturday, 8:30-ish in the morning, and we have never had, in my lifetime of being here, had so much homelessness to the point where there's this gentleman laying on a picnic table with a comforter, sleeping as if that was his bedroom, with all of his things centered around him. Across the street, diagonally from the rehab halfway house, within 200 feet of the illegal sticker shop. So those are 3 questions. My story, issue with housing, mental illness, and drug addiction are all contributing to this homeless population here in Chemung County. And I'm sure that's probably across the United States, but we're special. This is Chemung County, okay? We want to know what you can do to help us. This community is special. We have lots of history here, like all kinds. And I think you being here, I know is going to make a difference because you showed up. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bringing voice to what's happening here, but we need your help.
Yes, I understand the affordable housing crisis is real. It's all across our state. Every community does not have enough affordable housing. I think it's one of the hangovers of COVID that people left cities and they wanted to be in places that had more land around them, places like Chemung County. And so we are desperate for affordable housing. So I have 3 or 4 bills that I'm hoping I can get a vote on this Congress to change how we assess affordable housing, what the definition of affordable is, so we can get more subsidies through Section 8 and Section 202 programs through HUD. So change the definition, and then make sure that our public housing that we do have is safe. You know, a lot of our public housing is subpar. It has lead paint or vermin or mold, and people can't live like that. So we want to make sure that our public housing is up to snuff, and I have a bill to deal with that. So we do need a lot more, and we want to incentivize people to build more affordable housing. Now, one solution that is complex but worth looking at is how do you convert some of the office buildings that are empty because people are working remotely and not in person into housing. That's hard to do because there are different requirements for housing versus workplace. You know, how many bathrooms, how many windows, how far off from the sidewalk it sits. And so we'd have to really dig deep and figure out what changes can we make so that we can convert more of the old office buildings that aren't being used into actually apartment buildings. So that's one thing, and to incentivize our developers to do that and to give them the resources to do that work, that would help. So I understand it's a huge problem. We just need more incentives so more housing can be built, and then it can be more economic for the people who do the building so that it's there for the rest of us so we have affordable housing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so here's the other question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
All right, so the mental illness issue. Now, my best friends, my very best friends, are social workers, highly educated, highly.
Yeah.
They are the most indebted, most educated, lowest paid people.
Yeah.
It's unfair.
It's
and they are who we need to help address the mental health issue.
Yes.
What incentives is anybody talking about how to help those folks to be right-sized so they can continue in the work? Because they're leaving in droves just like nurses. I'm a nurse. Yeah. I'm just saying.
You're done. Yeah.
The nurses, the doctors need mental health.
You need everybody. First responders. So first responders need access to mental health. So we're working on legislation specifically for mental health access for first responders because COVID it nearly broke our system. Like, it was tough. 3 years of working nonstop, being the only face of protecting the country. It's really hard. It's why we've lost a lot of nurses and doctors. It was too much. It's why we lost a lot of first responders. A lot of our first responders are having trouble recruiting, all because of the challenges of the last 3 years. So we do have legislation to create a fund just for mental health. It's not only training more mental health professionals, but making sure they can get into the community to be available for first responders. The second thing on the debt that you mentioned, we just fixed a program that if you've done 10 years of public service, all of your debt gets vitiated. So make sure everyone you know, all the nurses and all the social workers and anyone who's a public servant and does first responder work, any type of public service work, they can get all their debt vitiated. The teachers union has been methodically, no, it was the nurses union has been methodically, maybe it was the teachers union. The teachers union has been methodically applying for this vitiation of debt. They've gotten over $350 million paid off from teachers in New York State. So it's real money. It's real money. So anybody who still has debt who's worked for 10 years, that's available today. I have another piece of legislation that's much better. That would be if you agree to go into public service, we'll pay your education tuition for you. Okay. If you do 5 years public service, another augmentation of the GI Bill for all public servants. So that would be something we would offer, and maybe it costs money. So maybe you do it industry by what you need first. I would do mental health professionals first, because we have such a lack of mental health professionals that are needed for our kids in schools, for first responders, for homeless. Those are some of our biggest mental health challenges. The other thing about mental health is we did just pass this bill paired with the gun trafficking bill. It's billions of dollars. So anyone who's offering mental health services that does any violence disruption, so preventing kids from joining gangs or going down rabbit holes and becoming shooters, or preventing people from using substance use to deal with mental health challenges, it's all eligible. And so we can get money into the community to do those programs specifically.
Should we contact your office?
Yes, so Austin's here. Austin has his business cards. Any not-for-profit, any community group, any elected leader entity that wants to apply for this mental health violence disruption money, it's available now. And we just have to apply for it to get the money into the community. And that's money to train mental health workers, it's money to employ mental health workers, it's money to relocate mental health workers here. Any violence disruption program that's mental health related is covered.
One more question?
No, we got two. So 1, 2. And the 3 that are left, you all can ask your question. I'll listen, you all ask, and then I'll answer.
So you touched on it. I was going to ask, along with mental health, along with the nursing crisis and shortage, what do we want to do to shore up our educational system? COVID really killed it, but just the fact that these are the most important workers, one of the most important workers.
Yeah.
They're entrusted with our future.
Yeah.
And we can't seem to attract
Enough
people
teachers
to cover the
Same
job
thing.
that are.
COVID, very, very bad. What's your question? I'll answer all 3 together.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, mine is not a question, but a suggestion.
Yeah.
Because I'm a real estate developer. So, and I've met you a couple of years back when we were talking about federal historic tax credits on a building I did down on Baldwin Street. Anyway, just a couple of components that are out there. So we know that many people have moved out of the state. They were living somewhere, so there's some space for them wherever they left. We have to find out where they were living, obviously, their houses or apartments or whatever. Secondly, the office space that you touched on, very important issue, because you're right, it is hard to convert. I convert a lot of stuff. This is our building, we converted into it. But thirdly, too, there are so many older vacant homes in the city and all over upstate New York that can be used for home ownership as opposed to renting. And these are components that are out there that could play a part in solving the housing crisis instead of just building new. The price of building new is over $200 a square foot now.
And renovations should be cheaper.
Renovations,
We
yes.
can definitely do that. So
Yes,
why don't you talk to Austin about some of the
Okay,
local,
I got this card.
local availability, so I can make sure it's reflected in our legislative
Great.
language.
Thank you.
And anybody else had something?
So I am a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm here with our president and Vice President of Elmira Teachers Association. And my concern is the lack of funds being put back into some of our smaller districts. Here in Elmira, we have a very high economic need for our students, and a lot of them are being cheated out of basic school supplies. And it's not from, the district has taken on supplying our students with basic, very basic supplies, but books, paper, like the physical things that our students should be getting and experiencing in this area that they can get from Horseheads and Corning because they have corporate sponsors is unfair. We need the state to step up and look at rural or suburban communities and say, oh my gosh, look at these kids in Elmira, they never get to go on a field trip. Yes, we are given a lot of money, most of that goes toward teacher salaries, and we are still 2/3 of what they get paid one county over. It's a problem.
Yeah.
And it's just not fair.
Yeah, no, it is very unfair.
The funding always goes to the city first.
So let's talk about that. So, yes, I agree, education, we need to do much better for our public schools. They need to be better funded, they need to be better resourced, and every child should have the same access to the same advantages, resources, supplies, opportunities. That should just be our baseline of what we're trying to do in education in this state for our kids. And our challenge has always been that education is funded from property taxes, so wealthy districts have a lot more money. A lot of the people that live there are wealthier, so they spend a lot more in after-school programming and opportunities for their kids. And so wealth really determines how well a public school is funded, and that's just a terrible model. It's always been a terrible model. I've never liked it. I never thought it works. It's just deeply unfair. So what the federal lens is on this, because federal government's not in charge of education, state government is. But what we are supposed to do is give you more money. We're supposed to send more money to the states for different types of requirements, but almost all of it is unfunded mandates. So for example, we say, well, we'll give money, but you have to provide special ed at this level. And we're supposed to give you like, I don't know what it was, 40% or something. If we're going to mandate it, we should fully fund it. So I'm very frustrated that the federal government has gotten away with not fully funding their federal mandates as opposed to a percentage. So one of the things I'm working on is special ed being fully funded by the federal government. Something as simple as that would take some of the burden off the shoulders of the local public school, because all of our schools need special ed, all of them, because our kids come from all different backgrounds, they come from all different starting places, they need special ed so they can get to their highest and greatest goals in their own education. And so that's one idea. So I'm trying to change what I can do on the federal level to get more money into the states and try to focus more on, we're gonna fund every kid. And for example, I could do something like, I will fund basic infrastructure for every kid in your state. So I can offset the costs for bricks and mortar, for HVAC systems that are better, for resources for gym and resources for arts and resources for music and things that aren't typically funded by the state because they don't have the money. Maybe that's the kind of thing that the federal government can do to offset some of your costs. So education reform is hard because we don't have the mandate to do it. And so the best thing I think I can do is just get more money into the state to defray all the costs that you're obligated to do. And then maybe the other thing is just, working with the governor on how do we get, as you mentioned, corporate support for all our public schools. So, we are so lucky that we have generous companies like Corning that want to help our local school districts, but not every community has a successful company in it. And so is there a way to look at all the Fortune 500 companies in New York State and ask them all to take on enhancing our public schools together? So that is a program that we have done in our state. It was one not-for-profit that did this, was called Say Yes to Education. They did it in Buffalo, they did it in Rochester, they might have done it in Syracuse, but they've not gotten to the small cities at all. But what that program was, a public-private partnership, and it asked all the local employers to say, these are your future employees. If you invest in the kids, we will invest in them as well. And it created a public-private partnership that guaranteed any kid that graduated from the local high school that their college tuition would be paid for by the Say Yes program. So it was just an example of what a public-private partnership could be. And they resourced it by getting the money from all the local employers. So maybe that's something I can work with the governor on to think about. How do we get corporations in New York, because we have some of the most successful companies in the world in New York, to look at education as the thing that they do philanthropically. Because that's, we need another source other than property taxes. And nobody wants their property taxes to go up. Nobody. And if you're asked to vote on, should property taxes go up to pay for education, everyone's going to vote no. Because nobody wants their property taxes. And once you're a senior, you definitely don't want to be paying for the education system because your kids are long graduated and, you don't have young children anymore. So it just becomes a us against them thing within our own state. So I think it's not a good dynamic. So long term, I would like to shift away from property taxes paying for education. I'd like us to focus more on every child deserves model, meaning everybody gets the 360-degree services, everybody gets the extracurricular investments, and then make the federal government's job to actually pay for the things they mandate. Last, the teachers themselves. Teachers are exhausted. Teachers they had the brunt of COVID. I think Trump was the president when COVID started. He made a very big mistake in the beginning. And I'm going to say this now so when this happens again, we don't do it the same way. Schools should have been designated as critical infrastructure. And with that designation, they should have been given enormous numbers of resources. So things like vaccine programs, mask programs where masks can be publicly made available, things like after-school programming, anything that helps a community survive, all those funds can be surged into the public schools. And then for the teachers that could not come in person because they're older or maybe living with older parents that could have been exposed, they can Zoom in. So this is what a lot of private schools did, and I saw it, and I thought, why are we doing that in the public schools? Because the kids weren't vulnerable, the teachers were. And the teachers needed to be protected, and some kids who had infirm or sensitive family members. But if you could have had kids in school during COVID and have teaching assistants, the kids who want to go into education from the local colleges and community colleges, staff, the classrooms, the teacher could have Zoomed in. And they did it in a lot of places around the country. We didn't do it in our public schools. So that would have kept the kids in schools. It would have been able to surge resources into our public schools as community centers. And it would have created a much better dynamic where we would have been better supported. And we should have been literally second in line after the hospitals. Hospitals get the first set of vaccines and PPE, schools next. Because if you use those schools, kids would have been going, feeding programs could have been done out of the schools, like all the things that broke during COVID and all the mental health issues that grew out of it, we could have, I think, in hindsight, if we had said schools are critical infrastructure, because anybody in education knows they are, and so designated and had the resources follow it, that might have changed outcomes too. And it would have, I just think the teaching population is exhausted. They had so many burdens, not only their own health, but they had the burden of keeping kids safe and keeping them on task and teaching them on a Zoom, which is really hard to do when you don't, and then the parents who had to stay home to pay attention, Bobby, disaster for every family. We could have had young people who want to go into education been doing the pay attention, Bobby, in the classroom while a teacher Zoomed in. So that's just my theory. I don't know if it would have had its own problems, but I would have liked to have tried it. So that's my thoughts. And so now to get more teachers back in the system, I really want to pass this public service bill where the education can be paid for by the federal government.
And funding is important because when I look at when my kids went to school, if you're in junior high, you got a loose leaf.
Yeah.
If you were in high school, you got a spiral. You had a composition where you were. Now these kids have a laundry list that their parents have to get, including sanitizer.
And nobody can pay for it. It's too much.
And then the teachers are buying out of their pocket.
Yes, I know. It's terrible. Anyway, I just want to thank you guys so much for coming out today.
Before you go,
Oh, we have something special?
we have something special for you.
Hey.
And I wanted to make sure I was able to introduce, again, Jim Hare, who is our election commissioner.
Yeah.
We have something special for you from the Chemung County Historical Society.
First of all, we want to thank you for all of your work we want to thank you for all of your work on the ERA.
Yes.
And this is the 100th anniversary of the first proposal of the ERA. It was
Wow.
1923. And I had a phone call from a good old Democrat who's a little upset, not at the work you're doing, but that Alice Paul seems to be getting some credit for the ERA, and a co-author of the ERA was Crystal Eastman.
Wow, and she's a local girl.
Crystal
There we
Eastman,
go.
yes. Crystal, of course, was a co-author of the ERA and is listed as the founding mother of the ACLU.
Wow.
And graduated from the Elmira Free Academy. Taught
We're
school
going to
here.
lift her up
and-
because Alice Paul's from New Jersey. and Cory Booker is not getting all the credit. I'm
Okay,
to make sure New York gets the
And
credit.
Crystal was also involved in writing workers' compensation laws and taught English here in Elmira for a couple of
Wow,
years.
what a
So
great legacy.
We salute you and for all your work. And
Thank you.
This is the 100th anniversary of the Chemung County Historical Society, and they presented this
Wonderful.
to you on their behalf, and we salute them also.
Thank you so much. I'm
definitely going to learn about Crystal Eastman, and I will make sure I talk about her when I talk about the ERA. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.